land in the world. Southern Appalachia hosts a form of folk Christianity that is, in spite of sweeping cultural changes in the United States over the past 50 years, still rooted in the frontier-era revivalism of over 100 years ago. In this bastion of the Bible Belt, churches of all kinds crowd the town centers. Religious preference is assumed rather than left to the individual conscience. But a new wind is blowing the region. While many churches find themselves in decline, Islam is growing rapidly. The religion of 1/5 of the world's population is finding expression in a region still zealously held by Baptists and other Christian evangelicals. When these two worldviews intersect, how is each affected by the encounter? Does America's suspicion of Islam increase or decrease religious fervor in the Islamic community? What does faith look like as it thrives in exile? Jerusalem, the holy city, home to the world's three monotheistic religions. While the world has tended to focus on the city's strife, the three religions claiming descent from Abraham live together in remarkable harmony there. Christians revere the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the church housing the traditional sites of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. Jews pray at the Western Wall, the only remaining part of the Second Temple destroyed in the 1st century and marking the beginnings of modern Judaism. The third holiest site in Islam sits atop the Temple Mount, the place of the Holy of Holies in the ancient Jewish temple. The Haram al-Sharif houses the rock upon which the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven. This rock is also the traditional site of Abraham's halted sacrifice of his son Isaac. Eastern Tennessee could not seem further from Jerusalem, nor could the holy city's cosmopolitan atmosphere seem more distant. And yet a transformation is taking place. This fertile land was settled by a rugged people who found a home in the mountains, finding freedom in their isolation and removal from the rest of the world. Once occupied exclusively by Baptists, Methodists, and other Christian evangelicals, this region is changing. It would be inappropriate to stereotype religion in modern Appalachia. Many churches resemble their European ancestors, while others have retained a particularly Appalachian character. Pentecostalism is still thriving in the mountains of East Tennessee, and with it comes a belief in the Christian faith's exclusive knowledge of the truth and a deep suspicion of other ways.
Mark chapter 11, verse 24. Let me read a portion of scripture that Jesus spoke. He made the statement, he said, from the King James Version, he says, "Therefore I say unto you, what things soever he desire, when he pray, believe that he receive them, and he shall have them."
In the 7th century, a powerful new religious force swept through the Arab world. This faith, grounded in radical monotheism, called for the submission to the one God whose name is Allah. The herald of this new message was a devout resident of Mecca named Muhammad, the prophet. Muhammad reported that while praying in a cave on Mount Hira outside of Mecca, he received a divine visitation in the person of the angel Gabriel. The prophet experienced moments of divine revelation over a span of 22 years. These encounters were finally collected and written down in a text called the Recitation, or the Quran. This text and the life of the prophet form the quintessential bedrock of the religion of Islam. By the time of Muhammad's death in 632, Islam had risen to dominance in the Arab world. By 750, Islam had spread from the heart of Russia in the east to Spain and southern France in the west. In 1453, Islam accompanied the Ottomans and Mehmed II when they conquered Constantinople and brought the Byzantine era to a close. By 1605, sultans such as Suleiman the Magnificent and Akbar had transformed Islam into an empire which spanned from Austria to India. Thus, what began as a dynamic religious reform eventually became one of the most powerful and influential political movements in the history of Western civilization. However, Islam's influence was not restricted to the arenas of theology and geopolitics alone. Islam changed the character of science, art, and culture in the West. The Islamic world made a major contribution to Western culture through its preservation of the learning of Greece, Persia, and the Orient. Major centers of science and philosophy were established by Muslims in Spain, Morocco, Egypt, and the city of Baghdad. Islamic scientists made major contributions to medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. Islam also made a significant contribution to the art and literature of the West. Islamic artists employed a flowing and distinct style of calligraphy and copying the Quran, as well as other literature. Islamic poets, such as Rumi and the ageless tradition of Arab storytelling, left a lasting impression on the literary tradition of Western civilization. Islamic culture also expressed itself in ceramic tile and carpet weaving. Islamic architecture altered the skylines of Europe, the Mediterranean, and even Asia. The domes which hug the earth and minarets which point to the heavens testify to the expanse and permanence of Islam. The designers of mosques utilized color, calligraphy, light, shadow, and space to emphasize the glory and essence of Allah, while at the same time providing a place for individual worship, prayer, and reflection. Magnificent examples of Islamic architecture are to be seen in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul and the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. In its religious persona, Islam is a complete way of life, encompassing beliefs, liturgy, devotional practice, diet, economic responsibilities, and social customs. Between 1892 and 1954, 12 million immigrants were processed at Ellis Island, the symbolic port of entry for generations of immigrants. Today, more than 40%, or over 100 million, of all living Americans can trace their roots to an ancestor who came through Ellis Island. Nearly every day, for over 2 decades, the registry room teemed with hopeful arrivals waiting to be inspected and registered by Immigration Service officers. As the tide of immigration swelled, sometimes over 10,000 people would file through this space in a single 24-hour period. Persons fleeing war or simply seeking a new life in America flooded Ellis Island during the early years of this century. Today, Ellis Island stands as a monument to the freedom immigrants once sought. The nation's airports now serve as the ports of entry into the United States. A large number of persons have come to live in East Tennessee because they could no longer live in their home countries. Persons who can document incidents of persecution may come to America as refugees. They are able to live and work as permanent residents while acclimating themselves to life in the New World, in Appalachia, settled by Scots-Irish immigrants over 150 years ago. Islam is growing at a rapid rate in the United States, including East Tennessee. While no government statistics have been kept regarding religious affiliation, it is estimated that there are currently more Muslims in the U.S. than there are Episcopalians. In as few as 10 years, there are likely to be more Muslims than Methodists. Mainline Protestantism has been declining for over 30 years, but Islam is growing rapidly.
The growth takes place in a variety of ways. One is through immigration, the other is procreation, and the third is conversion. Conversion is going on predominantly in the African American community. There are white converts to Islam, but they're a minority. But the largest contingent is African American Muslims. And there are some people who actually speculate that by the year 2020, all African American males will have become Muslim. And I think it's an exaggeration, but it is a way some people are thinking now because of the appeal of Islam to African American. The procreation is no question that the first generation has a higher fertility rate than the American people. And so procreation is a way they're growing. The other way in which they're coming is refugees. And 2/3 of the refugees of the world are Muslim. And the United States has clamped down on the number of refugees. We take less refugees than other people do.
My organization is an organization that makes it possible for refugees to get out of refugee camps and come to East Tennessee to start their lives over again. And the way we do that is we recruit church sponsors. We train those sponsors, and once the refugee family arrives, the sponsors provide a nurturing environment for that family so they can thrive here in East Tennessee. Sponsors provide all kinds of services for the refugee families. Starting from the moment that the family arrives, the sponsors there at the airport to meet them, to welcome them to the area. The sponsors help them with housing and employment, help them with transportation to all the places they need to get to, help them get into English classes and tutor them in English as well. It's a very complete kind of care that they give to refugees. And these are refugees from all over the world, all different faiths, different situations. The one thing that the refugees have in common is that they've lost everything. And they have a chance to come to the United States to start over again. I think there's one factor among refugee families that determines whether they're going to adjust easily or how fast they adjust to living here. That factor is their faith. And I've seen it with Christian refugees, with Buddhist refugees, and with Muslim refugees. The ones that have a strong faith tend to have very strong families, a lot of stability. It's amazing what they can do because they believe they're going to be all right. And it sets them apart from the others.
So how is life as a Muslim in Appalachia different from life elsewhere? In most ways, Muslims in Appalachia encounter many of the same challenges found elsewhere in America.
My wife comments that in Knoxville, Tennessee, her experience of neighborhood is 2 or 3 neighbors with whom she is on speaking terms, in the sense that she might greet those folks a couple times a month. Living in a Muslim town, the difference was that every time she went out of the house, she was greeted by 5 or 6 women who were standing around on the street talking to each other. And the experience was very similar for me as a man. There were always groups of men on the street. If I needed help with a little project around the house, all I had to do was walk out on the street and hail someone to come and give me a hand for a few minutes.
In our culture, in Muslim cultures in Pakistan, in India, or in Arabia, or Arab culture, there's a, and it's very correct that how Hillary Clinton, the whole village raised children.
When sunrise, your door is open. I mean, people just come and go whenever they please. People do not call, I mean, like here. Even if it is a mealtime, people just sit and eat with you. Everyone is welcome to anybody's home or house. People take care of each other. So if one is building a house, the whole community helps in building the house. When someone dies, the whole community goes to the burial ground. When someone is getting married, everybody celebrates. When someone is in trouble, everyone chips in.
While southern Appalachia prides itself on retaining the traditional American values of hospitality, friendliness, and neighborliness, Muslims often must make great adjustments in their lifestyles in response to the rugged individualism they find here.
One of the things we noted in some of the research we did is that if you go to a place which is isolated, where you have a very small number of Muslims. Sometimes you go into a town and there's maybe 1 or 2 families, and it'll be a doctor or a nurse or something. And these people have no other friend, and so they are forced to socialize within the American context. And we see that then they will allow their kids to do things that they wouldn't if they were living within a Muslim context.
I've got 4 children. 3 of them are boys, and boys of the age of 15, 14 now. They're, age of 14, 15. And in Islam or Muslim culture, we are very strict about segregation of the sexes, and which is not something bad or perceived bad in the society, that a girl or boy hug in a classroom or on a corridor of a school, which could be very innocent, had nothing to do with sex or anything of that. But in Islam, these things are not, tolerable. And making that understanding to my child is a difficult task. And that was a concern that I had. And I still have a concern, because I saw my, last year, I went to pick my son. He was 12 years old, and he's tall, a little bit handsome, and play basketball. And it's a basketball, team member of the school. And I saw a girl came and hugged him. That I cannot imagine for me or for my child for that age. I confronted with this my son. He understand, and he said he had no intention and he did not invite it. I said, just stop. And he said, how I can stop?
If you look at the campuses, where we have now a group of students coming from overseas, and you have the children of those who emigrated in the 60s and 70s, you will see that there is a difference, that the children of those who grew up in the United States are more liberal than the immigrants, at least the ones that are involved in the mosque movement, those who attend prayer.
And if you have an 8, the longer boats on this side would cost $20,000 to $25,000.
Rahim is the son of Indian Shiite Muslims that immigrated to East Tennessee in the early 90s. Like many second-generation Muslims, he can be heard trying to reconcile his religion with that of his peers.
It's kind of hard to, like, explain to people. I mean, they ask you what religion you are, and you're like, Muslim, and then, like, there's always a pause. You're always like, oh. And you always have to, like, go into this half-hour narrative about what Islam is really about, because they really haven't been exposed to the gist of Islam and how close it is to Christianity, or how close it is to Judaism. And, like, if you think about it, like, Judaism and Christianity are really close too. I mean, they're all three religions are face of the book. After that half-hour narrative, you got, like, a ton of questions. Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Noah? Really? And you're always like, the immediate response is shock or surprise, and then, like, a ton of questions. Like, a lot of it is different. Like, in my religion, you have to tithe 1/8 of your income. I know in Christianity it's 1/10, so a lot of people don't do that. And I know that, like, the 1/10 has been forgotten by a lot. And so, like, when I'm like, oh, I just got my allowance that I, like, whatever the figure is, and I'm like, but I don't have this much left. They're like, how come? I'm like, oh, I've tithed some, and they're like, tithe. And so it's like some of the beliefs, I mean, you encounter, like, shock or surprise.
You know, here in the United States, we have very few liberal thinkers who have come out of the Islamic movement. In Europe, we're beginning to have a few, in which people are beginning to create an Islamic theology for the Western Muslim. One of the things that the Muslim community has to deal with is the fact that there is no, equivalent of an Islamic seminary anywhere in the United States. And therefore, most of the imams, who are sort of the clergy types, the leaders of the mosque, are imported. And so their ideas of what Islam is, what Islamic culture is, are created and sort of fossilized over there. And we've had some situations in which the imam would come in and say, well, you can't do that. And the people say, oh, tough luck.
Let me be very frank with you. I've never been concerned that if I go anywhere being Muslim and people are of a different faith, that perhaps my own, upbringing or whatever I can say. But I felt like raising my children in the area with my values, my, background, and raising them, giving them understanding of my religion could have been, difficult in this area.
I've been to school during this Ramadan when I was fasting, and they just invited me to come down the stairs for lunch. I said, well, it was my first day, and I was like, I want to see how just staying upstairs feels, because I don't want to get, like, pangs of hunger this early in the morning. But my friend, she was talking to one of her friends in her class, and it was, like, around Christmas time, around this time, and her friend was like, come on, you should really trust me on this. Christmas is, like, really good and everything. It's better than not being able to eat food for the day.
Interestingly, I had this experience in North Carolina. I liked the game of golf, and I went to this instructor. My son had a soccer tournament, and there was some time in between, and I went to this instructor. And I went through the instruction course, and we were sitting by the TV screen, and he's explaining what I'm doing wrong and everything. And he asked me, what faith are you? And I said, I'm Muslim. Well, he said, Jesus saves. So, and I said, no, Allah saves.
Christians, there can be a problem in understanding the Muslim spiritual identity, because we here, especially in the Bible Belt, tend to think that one is not a believer until one has been converted. This is a peculiar strain in Christian belief. It's not held universally by Christians everywhere, but it's very strong in our region. And we hear expressions among Christians that you can't inherit your grandfather's religion, that your mother can't give you her faith, even though our mothers have a very big influence on our faith if we've grown up among Christians. Muslims very definitely think of themselves as Muslims because they were born that way. They may experience spiritual growth and have radical new spiritual insights that we as anthropologists would call second conversion, acknowledging that the first conversion is the conversion of the whole people years ago or centuries ago. So the individual's conversion is a secondary matter for Muslims, or the individual's spiritual growth. For us here in Tennessee, that's difficult to accept.
One of the things is there's no good understanding of that Muslim believes in one God.
If you're asking the question that do I have discussions or lively discussions with Christians about what is in the Bible and what is in the Quran, yes, we do. And there is an honest difference of opinion.
Actually, they've come out in a conversation the other day we are having in the car to my oldest son that, somehow this topic come out, or says that girl, he gave the name, and she tried to convert me. I said, what's she thought? And she says, okay, she told me about Jesus and Jesus, how he did. So, but how he responded with the Quran as well as understanding of Bible, it makes me, very happy and shocked in the sense that I never come across, and I'd never taught him the way, but he learned those things.
The thing that stands in my mind was meeting one of the students who told me that he had a girlfriend who was a Baptist, and she took him to church and told him that he was going to be born again. And he said, we went the first week, and I prayed, and there was the call to the altar, and I didn't feel anything. And then second week and third week and fourth week, and nothing happened. And then one morning at around 5 o'clock, somebody knocked on his door and said, brother, we're going to go have Quran recitation. He said, I went and heard the Quran, tears came down. And I was born again. I was very interested in the fact that he used the term born again. And the experience sounded parallel to the experience of Baptists in being born again. So I was wondering whether Appalachia is having sort of a unique influence on creating a born-again Islam as part of the cultural heritage of America.
The emphasis on conversion is also important because there is, in any Christian conversation with Muslims, at least a subtle question in the back of everyone's mind as to whether the other person would make a good convert to my religion. And that's not an unnatural question. It's really endemic to the nature of Christianity and Islam as well, that we think of the revelation given to Muhammad in the case of Muslims and to Jesus in the case of Christians as the most wonderful revelation of God.
But there was, if I remember correct, there was a Muslim imam. There was a guy from the Buddhist organization, a Buddhist priest as well, and somebody from the Christian faith. And they all three shared the same pulpit. Can you understand which way I'm going now? That Muslim and that Buddhist, they have to sit down. They have no right to stand behind the pulpit. Because they are proclaiming a false gospel.
I thought it was some type of group, you know, like satanic group or something. Because I didn't know, because you see all of them go in, and they go in, shut the door, and they all come out. I mean,
Being in the minority is something of a universal experience. Whether by force or by choice, the experience of leaving home and starting over in a new society intensifies the feeling of being in exile, being a stranger in a strange land. When one is not at home in his or her surroundings, one might be broken by the experience, but another might be strengthened, empowered, emboldened by the reality that one's faith and way of life cannot be taken for granted.
I thought that Islam is a well-known thing, and I thought the good stuff I know about Islam is stuff that should be known because there are so many Muslims in the world. And it doesn't necessarily make Islam a good or a bad religion, but it makes it big enough for people to know about it.
We have various ritual concepts and experiences in the Christian faith which we share with Muslims and Jews. Everybody knows that, but we don't know quite how detailed it can get. In Christianity, we believe in sacrifice. Christianity would not exist except for the concept of sacrifice. Jesus, we believe, is the sacrifice for our sins. A Christian family I know was offended by their Muslim neighbors who slaughtered a sheep in their backyard at the beginning of the one of the Muslim feasts. The Muslim way of slaughtering an animal is no less humane than the way we do it in the slaughterhouses in America, and in fact, it is endued with a ritual flavor that's quite impressive if you watch it. So I think with Muslims living cheek by jowl with Americans in the Bible Belt, there has to be more conversation about religious concepts that we share, even though the acting out of them is quite different.
I just feel it. I mean, if you look, I mean, even here at the mosque, I mean, I know there are even Muslims who do not come and practice with us. So we really feel like we are a minority. I mean, and, although there is no obstacle, I mean, no one is, stopping us from expressing our faith or anything like that, but we still feel we are in the minority because of the small number of people in a very large community.
And there was two men in a Jeep, and they just kind of, I don't know whether it was just because of me or they were just in the mood of doing that. They made some very nasty remarks, and I couldn't hear them properly, but I know it was just not very good.
Well, I was telling you, one time I was talking to one of my classmates, and he was asking me what religion And I told him, I'm a Muslim. And he looked at me with amazement and said, why?
Islam isn't like a lot of terrorists. They don't just go out to kill people. I had this dream once that I was coming down the stairs, and there was this club like right behind me, and my brother was coming down behind me, and the girl that was like telling people to come in the store, she was like, "You're a Muslim, you stink." And then she went back in there and said, "Islam is terrorist." And then I kind of walked back and said, "Islam isn't terrorist and everything." But that was just a dream. I don't think anybody in this area would ever do that.
It amazes me that people think Muslim, they think bomb. It's like the words are like, always have to be associated together. Muslim bomb, Muslim terrorist.
There are Muslims who do that, but the problem is people take this as, exemplifying Islam, and that's not true. You cannot just take a couple of people who do bad things and then say, okay, this is what all Muslims do, because the majority of Muslims are very nice and kind people.
And the perception of Islam is that it is a violent religion, and that it is a religion that is spread by the sword. Jihad, for example, is always construed to be holy war. And those are the issues mainly about Islam, and that kind of clouds the whole the issue of what Islam is. People really don't know what Islam means. People really don't know what jihad means.
Today there's a rising radicalism in religious movements around the world, and we see this in Islam, and that's of course what is most interesting to the professional media, who are interested in problems more than they're interested in life. And that can be quite offensive to Muslims, feeling rightly on their part that we tend to stereotype them in unfair ways.
Not too long ago, we had an article in the newspaper that was really vicious. It just talks about very negative, bad, dark, picture of Muslims and of Islam. It makes Muslims look like vicious, retrograde, caveman, and
I think in a lot of times Muslims tend to point fingers, and when you point a finger at somebody, I always tell them that 3 fingers are pointing back at you. So I look at myself and say, what are the things that I can do to promote Islam in this area? And one of the things is to talk to people about Islam.
After coming to the United States, what was most important, I found out, is because back home we were in a Muslim country, so being Muslim was like we're like everybody else. But over here, when I came, the awareness of being a Muslim and how important my religion was started dawning on me and becoming more and more important as the children were born, as I was raising them as a mother. And as I was raising them, I was finding out that I needed to be a better Muslim or know more about my religion to explain to them.
One of the things that we have to keep in mind is the United States, theoretically, has a constitution that says we the people. And that means we have a very weird kind of value system in which we don't like one thing, we take it out and put another one, because we the people decide what values are. And I think Islam would never accept we the people. It would always start with God, and then we the people interpret within the framework of what God wants. So God would come first.
Of course, for us, it's a dichotomy here, because we as American citizens sign a piece of paper that says we will follow the U.S. laws. But above the U.S. laws is God's laws, is Allah's laws. And anything that breaks Allah's laws, we can't do. I mean, if abortion is legal, it's not legal within the Muslim community. Now, if you ask the question, do Muslims have abortion? Probably, but they're not following Islam. And let me be frank with you. I mean, I really don't think today that we have, quote unquote, an Islamic government anywhere where Islamic rule lives. Some of the countries might follow Islamic rituals, but whether they actually follow Islamic Sharia law is debatable at best. I mean, when you talk about one nation under God, and then we say we the people decide, that in itself there's no equation there.
But I don't think we in the Constitution it doesn't disturb me as a Muslim, because I don't think we means people have a position that is higher than that of God.
Both sides, I think, when we sit down with each other, know that the whole world is not going to be converted to our way. It's best to acknowledge that. It's best to acknowledge the joy and the peace that we find in our own tradition, in our own religious belief, and that we would deeply desire for the other to have that. And if both can say that, make that statement in a spirit of friendship, I think we can have strong relationships with one another as religious cousins. After all, that's who we are, according to our own traditions. Children of Abraham by different fathers, and that makes us cousins to one degree or another. Lacking that kind of friendship, then the universal claims of both religions become a cause of serious conflict. We've seen what that kind of conflict can mean in Palestine and Israel during the last 50 years. That kind of conflict does not need to happen between Christianity and Islam. Cousins are different. They come from different families, but cousins aren't enemies.
رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Ramadan begins in Johnson City, Tennessee, in this small community. Every day begins with a meal to sustain them through the daylight hours. Every evening closes with the community gathering for prayers and the breaking of the fast. It is a time for discipline, devotion, and reflection.
Yeah, during Ramadan, we fast from dawn to sunset. And dawn is like 1.5 hours before sunrise. We are supposed to stop eating. So the whole day we don't drink, we don't eat. There's just nothing. You can't eat anything. At sunset, we break our fast and we pray, and then we begin to eat. And dinner is served, we eat, and then we go for the evening prayers. And then we come home, and usually my children and I am hungry again. So we sit down and we pick little of this and little of that. And then we go to bed, and then I wake them up about 45 minutes before we're supposed to stop eating so that we can eat another meal. The children eat some rice and curry and cereal and milk and all of these things, and then we stop eating.
People are very, intrigued and very much what you call want to know about the thing, what exactly it is. Many of them have some understanding of fasting, but because like in Christian tradition we have fast, but fast you can leave a thing that you like, and many people think. But when they came to know that from dawn to dusk you don't eat, drink, and do any of those activities, it's very interesting for them. In terms of my children, they usually, before the beginning of Ramadan, we sent a letter to the principal and the concerned teachers about explaining the month. They have to fast, they may not take the lunch, they may take time off in between to offer their prayers, and they all respect and facilitate this whole observance.
The things that I like about this place, I think the lifestyle is conducive. It's a slower lifestyle than in a big city. I have found people over here, and I can only speak with people I am involved with, very supportive of religion. Now, being in the position that I am in the community, we have come across many instances where we have had to respond to some kind of criticism, and I have found people very supportive of our response. I'm talking about Muslims being supportive of that response.
Most Muslim countries, I mean, it is not, even as a Muslim, you are not free to express yourself. Although Islam, I mean, has freedom of speech as one of its pillars. I mean, people are free to express themselves, I mean, to speak up. And in fact, Islam encourages it. I mean, if you are a true Muslim, you have to stand up for your right. You have to speak up. You have to give nasihah, which is advice to people who are in charge. So as a Muslim, I think it is easier for Muslims, and it is a more environment to practice Islam in than in any other Muslim country in the whole world.
What is happening to Muslims in America is similar to how Christians overseas sort of maintain their identity. Going to the church in Syria is very important because that's where you can become Christian. The rest of the time you are in a totally different atmosphere. And I think that for the Muslim in the United States, going to the mosque is a very important time where they are reaffirmed and reconfirmed in their identity that it is okay to be Muslim, especially in a sea of people who are different, who have different values.
It will be a growing community. And inshallah, in 15 years, you will hear the azan coming from a minaret. Inshallah. I think it will happen. If we can have church bells, we can have azan.
Yeah, I think that can happen. I mean, I think that can happen. I think one of the reasons of what people here being religious is maybe a plus in the possibility of bringing us closer together, because I think sets of morals, I mean, for example, families, I mean, taking care of the elderly, respecting, for example, their elderly or their parents, taking care of their young, all these things we also believe in. So I think if we talk about it, we take this common ground as a starting point, I think that would help us establish a relationship together.
Groceries, the ingredients are the main problem, because not all the ingredients are, we call it halal and haram. Halal are the one that's permissible for us to eat, doesn't have any pork.
In a sense, you could look at it as persecution, but it really isn't. In a sense, it brings out in the person this a great deal of more devotion, because it becomes a conscious act. It's not because everybody is doing it, it's because I am a more devoted person, and therefore I will accept whatever censure there is from my colleagues, and I will do it.
No, I think just because I dress differently, people in the beginning, I think in the onset, they're apprehensive of what to expect from me.
And for those who do it, and they sometimes flaunt it. They're going to say, well, where is the place where I am going to pray?
After coming to the United States, what was most important, I found out, is because back home we were in a Muslim country, so being was like we're like everybody else. But over here, when I came, the awareness of being a Muslim and how important my religion was started dawning on me and becoming more and more important.
So, in a sense, being a Muslim becomes a full-time job.
Shares its origins and principles with Judaism and Christianity, but still, Islam is seen as a threat. Patriarchal, authoritarian, hostile to the West, militant. Muslims stand accused of emphasizing liberal values in Western democracy. The fears exist, but are they justified? Tonight on Frontline, the many faces of Islam. A journey to the Middle East, to Africa and Asia, to Europe and America. For much of history, Islamic civilizations matched or surpassed those of the West. Islam inspired rich cultures of science and medicine, art and architecture. But 200 years ago, the balance changed. The West became increasingly dominant. By the early 20th century, most Muslims had been colonized, their traditional institutions and identities fractured by European powers. Today, many Muslims are rethinking the role of their religion in the face of globalization and omnipresent Western culture.
They feel that the sort of values, ideas, notions of living which are emanating from the West and beginning to penetrate their societies, influencing their young in particular, that these are harmful.
There's a kind of inescapability of modernity or global and then they start thinking about it, how we deal with it. They would say, well, we want to put an obstacle, a wall between us and all these foreign effects, global culture, meaning that they want to be pure in the sense of Islam and not contaminated with any other thing.
There is a resurgence. That's very clear. People have attempted to return to their roots, as it were, to life to their earlier cultures. We don't want to be like Europe. We don't want to be like any. We want to return to our roots. Now we want to bring back Islam.
Cairo, capital of Egypt, the largest city in the Arab world. In the bazaars of the old city, early mornings are accompanied by the sound of the Quran. These are believed to be the words of God, as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad in Arabia in the early 7th century. The Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad's life have inspired faith, informed behavior, and shaped whole societies for centuries. Sheikh Muawith Mabruk Abbas is a scholar who has spent his life immersed in the traditions of Islam. He has seen for himself the changes of the last years, an often repressive government, now supported by the West, the poverty that followed failed economic policies, and traditional lifestyles threatened by Western values. He's concerned about the role of Islam in Egypt today.
Muslims have left Islam. They don't know what God has ordered them to do or what the Prophet taught. That's why there are problems. And things have happened that faith would prevent.
3 days a week, Sheikh Muawith works here at the Al-Azhar Mosque. Al-Azhar is known as the oldest Islamic university in the world. For over 1,000 years, it has been a center of learning for Muslims.
Its influence stretches from America to Southeast Asia. Sheikh Muawiyah first came to study here when he was 14.
The Sheikh would sit here, surrounded by people. He would then teach traditional interpretations of the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet and all matters of religion.
After 16 years of study, Sheikh Muawiyah qualified as a scholar of Islamic or Sharia law. Sharia law is the attempt to derive a comprehensive code for living Islam's sacred text, the Quran, and from accounts of how the Prophet Muhammad lived his life. It covers everything from how to pray to how to punish criminals, but there are several different schools of interpretation. The Sheikh uses his knowledge of the Sharia to issue fatwas, or legal opinions, to Muslims seeking his advice.
من سنة 50 دخلت الأزهر.
In 1950, I entered Al-Azhar and ended up with an expertise in matters of religion and the world. So when someone asks me something, I have the knowledge and I've studied, specialized. I draw upon my experience.
The Sheikh receives a call from a young man. Like a growing number of Egyptians questioning traditional values, the caller has married unofficially in an attempt to legitimize pre-marriage sex.
No, it doesn't count as a real marriage. Whatever happened after that is considered a sin. A correct marriage, my son, is a contractual relationship. You must have the approval of her father, 2 witnesses, a dowry, and you must announce it to the community. This is a secret marriage. It's wrong. And it's forbidden, forbidden, forbidden.
We don't have an ordained priesthood, which makes it a little complicated. But we do have a tradition of scholarship and rules of scholarship and a kind of a growing consensus of opinion on how one should think correctly to arrive at what would be deemed a correct decision.
The biggest problems these days are divorce, marriage, and family life.
مشكلة في لجنة الفتوى. خش هنا. إن شاء الله لجنة الفتوى هناك.
Sheikh Muawiyah heads the Fatwa Committee of Al-Azhar. These scholars issue fatwas to people who visit in person, but they're also available to Muslims abroad.
Al-Azhar has organized the Fatwa Committee to answer and explain to all Muslims in Egypt and outside Egypt. We get faxes from Australia, from America, Europe, about business dealings, responsibilities, and all sorts of things like that. And we try to answer them.
While not all Muslims share the same interpretation of Islamic law, the sheikhs are troubled when people like Osama bin Laden issue rulings of their own.
These kinds of fatwas have no basis in religion. Anyone just issuing a fatwa like that should not be trusted. It should neither be considered the religion of Islam or the teachings of Islam.
The sheikh is concerned that Islamic scholars have lost the influence they once had.
There would be a problem for Muslims if they simply followed their faith. As long as there's no faith in people's hearts, then there's emptiness.
In Iran, Islamic scholars not only have influence, they control the country. Here, the taking of the U.S. Embassy is still commemorated every year. This was the first modern nation-state to reject secular ideas and rebuild its government according to Islamic principles. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was a shock to Americans. But for many Muslims, the revolution was inspiring evidence of the power of a modern political Islam.
What we called radical Islam, which shaped maybe the Iranian Revolution, this was the basic idea of Islamization of whole society, this utopia. I mean, a kind of this ideal to Islamize different spheres of life, starting from your inner world, but going to the mode of government, the Islamic State.
In the late 1970s, Mahdi Hadavi Tehrani was a student studying engineering. But after the revolution, he spent a decade specializing in Islamic philosophy and law to become one of Iran's more than 300 ayatollahs. Ayatollah Hadavi is still enthusiastic about the revolution, but admits that making economic ties with much of the West hasn't been easy.
During these 23 years, we have tried to stand on our own feet, and it was very difficult. And you know that the Western countries, they do not want this. They want a country to depend on them and to be controlled in a way by them.
The Ayatollah lives in the holy city of Qom, the center of religious learning in Iran. Here, he teaches Shia interpretations of Sharia law to some of the 40,000 students who travel to Qom from as far away as China. Shia Muslims split from the majority Sunni Muslims over a leadership struggle some 13 centuries ago. Tensions can still exist between the two groups today. In many Muslim countries, Sharia influences the legal system but is not strictly applied. In Iran, an Islamic state, the Sharia is the foundation of the law. But there is an ongoing debate. Reformers like President Mohammad Khatami believe that Islam allows for greater social and political rights than are currently permitted. Hardliners disagree. Ayatollah Khatavi's views lie somewhere in between. Qom is an old and traditional Muslim city. Here, women must dress modestly. Most wear the Persian cape, known as the chador.
History has shown the beginning of the corruption in a society is always from the women's side because of their important role in the quality of the society as mothers, sisters, wives in home and outside home in the society. On the other hand, on the side of man, they should control themselves. If you look at the woman, you should not look at her in some sexual desires and so on. Woman is a symbol of beauty and a symbol of love, and you should take care of this symbol to take care of the society, to take care of the family.
Mahdi Hadavi lives on the outskirts of Qom. He is married with 4 children.
Part of Islam is for taking care of family. If it is unstable, then the society is unstable.
The Ayatollah believes that women must put their family first. But he doesn't necessarily believe that they should stay at home.
My wife is teaching now in university. She is teaching Islamic philosophy and logic. My daughter now is in College of Fiction. We hope that she will be able to enter the university. We do this wuzu. It is a kind of cleaning that we do this for prayer. And we think that when you do this, your soul is in better situation, and we take care of this throughout the day, not only for the prayer.
For the Ayatollah, Islamic principles and rituals shape the whole of his life. But central to his faith are 5 defining practices that all observant Muslims everywhere share: declaring faith, giving to charity, fasting, pilgrimage to Mecca, and prayer.
When you're in prostration, it is the closest point of the creature to God. Allahu Akbar.
About the Americans' impression about Islam, you know, people in America, they are thinking they are the standard of life. They should understand the differences of the traditions, the differences of the cultures. And if they understand this, then we will reach to a better circumstances for dialogue.
4,000 miles to the southeast of Iran lie Malaysia's Perhentian Islands. Islam came here late, some 700 years ago. But now, 1/5 of the world's Muslims live in Southeast Asia. Islam arrived through trade and was spread by Muslim mystics known as Sufis. As it took hold, Sharia laws mixed with local customs to produce a inclusive form of the faith. The arrival of Western tourists was welcomed. Mustafa Rahman has lived on these remote islands for his whole life.
At first, I was a farmer. The income was not that good, so now I run a business.
That business is a complex of chalets catering to the tourists.
Outsiders, particularly the tourists, have caused a little stir among them. Their way of dressing is not the same as the Muslims, but it's not a serious problem. This is because we understand that their cultures are different from the Malaysian culture. We respect their culture and are not angry with them.
Rahman is not just a businessman. He is also the island's prayer leader, or imam. He believes that villagers and tourists can coexist as long as the Muslims live by the values of Islam.
What I like about an imam is that I can explain to those who know less or who don't know at all about the teachings of Islam.
The imam is the island's 70-year-old mosque, which is a meeting hall and community center.
Islam is an Arabic word. And to me, it means safe, peace. I like the mosque better than my own house. I mean the comfort of sitting in the mosque. It's peaceful, with no disturbances.
Today, Imam Rahman is preparing the mosque for Friday prayers.
The prayer mat is placed on the carpet so that our forehead won't feel the floor when we pray. Another reason for having the prayer mat is to cover any filth or dirt on the carpet. You see, Islam gives priority to cleanliness. That's why I say Islam is a safe religion. Because when we adhere to Islamic rules and regulations, we will be safe.
On Fridays, all men in the community are obligated to meet together. After reciting the Quran, the Imam reads the short sermon. The challenge to traditional values is most obvious in Malaysia. A growing number of Malaysians now live in the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Here, Islam is practiced alongside Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. But over the past 30 years, mass migration has forced many Muslims to reconcile rural traditions with modern lifestyles. Halina Halizar and her husband Zul both grew up in villages outside Kuala Lumpur.
We don't really have to imitate all that is happening in the West. We can always do it differently in the sense that even though we can be as developed, but we at the same time being very developed in our value.
Halina's family now lives in the city, but they still adhere strictly to the values and rituals of Islam.
Of fulfillment and the sanctity that you get from it is beyond description. One just have to experience it to know how it feels.
Halina sees no conflict between Islamic traditions and a modern lifestyle.
I think I'll die. I just stay at home and be a homemaker because then I feel so much potential that will go wasted.
So in 1985, Halina went to medical school. Today, she is an obstetrician and gynecologist.
I was lucky to be born in this country. This is a place where women has always been working side by side. And that's the tradition. I would say I'm a very empowered woman. Liberated? Well, I don't need to be liberated. I've been born a free person.
Okay, go.
I decided that I should be a specialist in gynecology. Of course, Muslim women will ask permission from their husband. That's what I did. And I really wanted Zul to give me the permission because somebody has to. And he did. Not to say that I would not take no as an answer. But again, it depends on how you ask for the permission, yeah?
Okay.
Okay. Hey, Assalamualaikum.
Also leads the women's section of an Islamic organization that encourages other Muslims to practice traditional values. One program is this home for Muslim girls who have become pregnant outside marriage.
2.5, all right.
Halina believes that Islam forbids abortion, except when the mother's life is at risk. These girls are looked after until they marry or their babies are adopted.
So we have decided first session ni mengenai anatomy. I guess the attitude towards sexuality in the West is more or less too liberal for our standard as those living in the East as well as by the Islamic standard. Okay, yeah? I don't think that it is fair to say that Islam restricts your sexual desire or whatever. It is not restricting. It is more directing it towards a more purposeful kind of life.
To better understand the tension between East, we've come here to Istanbul, Turkey, a city straddling both Europe and Asia. Istanbul has an Islamic past. Until 1922, it was the center of the last great Islamic empire of the Ottomans. But 80 years ago, Kemal Ataturk became the first leader of a Muslim people to believe that in order to modernize, Islam's influence on society had to be...
Governments which ruled Muslims were very often, like colonial governments, they suffocated Muslims. They suffocated those who wanted to go back to their original culture. With all due respect to Kemal Ataturk in Turkey, I mean, this man is attempted to suppress Islam.
Under Ataturk, Friday ceased to be a public holiday and mosques emptied. Sharia law was replaced by Western legal codes. Islamic scholars were forced to submit to state control. Arabic script replaced the Latin alphabet. Were sent back to school to learn it.
All the history of modernization went in a way which excluded Muslim culture. So in order to be modern, especially in the Turkish case, we had to get away from our Muslim background.
With his power as president and dictator, he begins reform. He commands young Turks to go to business school. In foreigners to show girls how to dress, how to manage the European way. Into European dress, he forces both men and women, sweeping away the veil and the fez.
For several decades, it seemed as if Ataturk's reforms could succeed. By the 70s, Turkey had become one of the most organized countries in the region and an active member of NATO. But at the same time, rapid urbanization was changing Turkey. A free market economy had increased inequality, and voters were frustrated at what they saw as corruption within the political system. Many Muslims began to question Ataturk's belief that Islam should be removed from politics.
This desire to talk about politics separate from Islam is something that Muslim scholars on the whole have never accepted. Why? The Prophet Muhammad was a prophet and a statesman.
So pro-Islamic politicians promised to rectify a split that they saw as artificial. Turkish secular author Ayşe.
It's very easy to use religion in Turkey, in other Muslim countries, as part of Turkey is very poor, and then they just believe that if the Prophet time comes back again, they will be prosperous. And this is what they claim.
By 1996, the Turkish Islamic Party had gained enough popularity in over 20% of the national vote and came to power in a coalition government. In response, secular officials clamped down on Islam's most visible symbols. These women became victims of a crackdown on the headscarf, which was banned from all public institutions.
I was studying here, this university, for 3 years. I studied at the Department of Physics. But the 4th year, I couldn't enter because of my headscarf. They said us, you are covering your head with hijab, with scarf. You couldn't enter this university. But I studied with my headscarf for 3 years. Yeah, this building is the library of Istanbul University. And we can't, with our headscarf, even in a library, we can't go, we can't enter, we can't search in there.
If we allow the girls to cover their heads, one day we would be to cover our heads as well. We were frightened that if we had allowed them, they would turn Turkey into
The headscarf isn't an oath that represents a political party or a movement. In my opinion, it's not an instrument of propaganda. For me, the headscarf is about being religious and is a symbol of Islam.
I wasn't dangerous and I'm not dangerous.
The vice rector of Istanbul University played a central role in enforcing the headscarf ban. She is Nur Sirter.
It was only a matter of headscarf. With the headscarf, many other things have started to take place at universities. For example, the students, they didn't want examinations or classes on Fridays. There are many mosques around Istanbul University. Students, instead of going to mosques, they wanted to do their praying at the corridors. And they published some magazines saying that they are coming to the university to fight for an Islamic state. So day by day, his demands increase. And of course, afterwards, some limitations took.
When the band started, I was in my 4th year of medical school. That day, just as I went into class and sat in my chair, my teacher came over and told me I had to leave. For half an hour or so, I tried talking to him, but they called the police. They grabbed me and carried me out.
The police moved in to break up the demonstrations.
Islamic movement, in a way, follows the principle of identity that we observe in the West. That means, as a social movement, they don't want to be assimilated to the principle of Western modernity. They have said, no, we want to be even more Muslim than what you expect. You know, there is this kind of exaggeration of this Islamic identity that we see today. We want to be modern, not in the Western way, but Islam. So they are trying to tell us, like, black is a beautiful formula, Islam is beautiful. Different sets of civilization.
These women began to work for a human rights group, counseling other students caught in the same situation and campaigning against the headscarf ban. But rather than the ban being lifted, the headscarf became the focus of a political crisis. Merve Kavacha, a 30-year-old U.S.-educated software engineer with dual U.S.-Turkish citizenship, was elected as a deputy for the Islamic Party. She had worn a scarf throughout her campaign, but when she attended the swearing-in ceremony, the parliament erupted. Solidarity was Nasli Ibat.
When we walked into the room, perhaps 120 deputies just stand up and began to shout, out, 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 out.
5 minutes, declared, and Merve Kavacha was forced to leave the parliament building. Within 2 weeks, she was stripped of her Turkish citizenship. 2 years later, her party was shut down. While we were moved to one, Islam into 2 parties, a traditional and a reform wing.
This is the press conference of the traditionalists, and we want to listen to what he says.
Leading reporter Abdullah Gul has worked in Islamic politics for the last decade. An advisor.
I personally, have to emphasize the fact that Islam can go along with democracy. And that is why we want to be very successful. If the Turkish example is not successful, I would say that Muslims will be more radical. Express yourself, your views, your values in a democratic way. How else can you express them?
The headscarf ban remains in force in Turkey today. Back in Malaysia, Hadi Awang is a conservative Muslim leader who has come to power through the democratic process. His Friday sermons regularly attract around 5,000 people. Some travel over 100 miles to hear him.
Sudah minum alhamdulillah. Melazimkan diri dengan membaca Quran, makanan roh dan menguatkan roh. Bila roh seseorang diperlemah, boleh diganggu oleh.
In 1999, was elected chief minister of Malaysia's northeastern state of Terengganu. with 15% of the national vote. His party now forms the main opposition to Malaysia's sitting government.
Islam telah berjaya membentuk
Islam successfully created an empire, 1,000 years.
bahawa Islam adalah
This indicates that Islam has the ability not only to be the religion of an individual,
agama individu bahkan agama negara
but also the religion of a country
dengan perundangan
that rules with justice.
apa yang penting
What is it? We want to be given the opportunity through democracy to implement Islam in our government.
The Chief Minister's party is calling for the implementation of full Sharia law for Malaysia to become an Islamic state.
At the root of it, it's a desire to live as a Muslim. Is a vital ingredient in shaping the environment in which you live.
According to Chandra Muzaffar, the Islamic Party's popularity stems from uneven development and limited political participation.
Muslims here, as elsewhere, often feel descend Islam because they associate Islam with the quest for an ideal.
Here in Kuala Lumpur, the government has responded to the Islamic Party's popularity not with repression, but by becoming more Islamic itself. It has introduced interest-free banking, Islamic University, and given Sharia courts greater autonomy. While criminal cases are tried in secular courts, family law is administered by Islamic judges. The changes have not been welcomed by all Muslims, especially women. Ida Melli has been trying to get divorce for 6 years. It began 7.5 years into an arranged marriage when she heard rumors about her husband's behavior.
What happened was I gave birth, and then I heard stories that he was getting married to someone else. But one day I confronted him and he said yes.
Under Islamic law in Malaysia, Muslim men may marry up to 4 women.
As the months progressed, he became more and more abusive, and then there was a quarrel, and he actually punched me. He punched me because I asked for money for the nursery.
Ida hired a lawyer and took her case to one of Kuala Lumpur's Sharia courts. Under Sharia law here, men have the automatic right to divorce, but women must prove their case before a judge.
You said as attempt to the court. Final attempt for a divorce. I should get it because this is a proper procedure. You see?
Ida meets with her friend, women's rights activist Zaina Anwar.
Ida first came to me because of the problems that she had in getting a divorce. Not want to give. So he has married a woman without her knowledge and has children with that other woman, and even though he's violent to her, both physically and mentally. So on many grounds, yeah, under the Islamic family law, she has the right to a divorce.
Zaina gave Ida some books on women's rights under Malaysia's law.
This is the Islamic family law. This one is the Selangor Sharia.
You know, she told us that, you know, it was like with the reading, you know, that she had, that she finally, you know, realized what her rights are and realized that her lawyer had not given her the best advice.
Finally, to represent herself in court.
This is myself and my ex-husband.
6 months later, the court upheld her claims against her husband and granted her a divorce.
This caused a stir in the society, actually, this article, especially among the men. They were discussing about. They said something like, you know, now Muslim women, they know their rights. Watch out.
The lower court had granted her divorce, but the husband appealed against that divorce. And this is where the problem begins.
Ever since, Ida has been fighting her appeal.
So the law
says that a woman can initiate divorce, apply for divorce, many of the judges did not want to give the women a divorce for as long as the husband doesn't agree.
Today, Ida is returning to the Sharia court to file an affidavit which will bring close. It was cases like Ida's that led Zaina Anwar to change interpretations of Islamic law. She lived in the United States for 5 years, earning master's degrees in journalism and international affairs at Tufts. But her interest in women's rights began at home.
The picture of my parents, my father, my mother. He was a man of integrity, of incredible principles, honesty, loyalty. I think at the same time, it's because of him too, I think I became a feminist, partly, maybe a lot, because he was a patriarch family. A very old-fashioned man, where he expects the woman in the house everything to serve him on hand and foot. That had a great influence, I think, in the growing sense of this is not right, this is not fair.
Zaina helped establish a research and advocacy for sisters in Islam.
This is all the attacks in the newspapers.
Through letters to newspaper memoranda to government officials. These Muslim women are challenging traditional understandings of Islam. It makes them a controversial organization.
The one at the top is over an article that I think one of the investigators wrote about a family law workshop. Where Islamic matters are concerned, this organization is the most inappropriate source of information, and I think it should be banned.
Sisters in Islam first met together in 1988.
But as we went on, that working alone was not enough, because so much of the gender bias forms the law comes from an understanding of religion that discriminates against women. We felt we had to go back to the Quran, we had to go back to the revealed text of the religion to whether the text actually the ill treatment and oppression of women.
I actually found solace in the Quran. And when I started working on my affidavit, actually I'm become closer, and I have faced that it's a good relief. Only that the problem is with the Sharia court. They should make exceptions in this matter, because this is involving lives, involving thousands of women and children, it involves suffering. And that is not the true Islam.
We found, it is not Islam that discriminates against women. It is not the verses in the Quran. It's the way these verses have been interpreted by men living in patriarchal society who wish to maintain their dominance and their supremacy and control over women.
Ida arrives at the Sharia court, but faces a delay.
The judge and the registrar is busy, but he didn't tell me to go away, but he just, well, Ida, you're here, we are busy, we have this guest. So, I don't know, we'll see.
A bigger problem is Sharia law itself. The process of legal interpretation, or ijtihad, among Sunni scholars, came to a halt some 750 years ago. Their opinions have been accepted as definitive ever since.
The problem is that these interpretations have been elevated to be the word of God, as if they are divine, when actually they are only merely a human effort at understanding God. And just as the context of that time in the 12th century influenced how these men interpreted the word of God, the circumstances of our lives today have influence in the way we interpret the text today.
The administrator overseeing Ida's case is Abu Bakr Dawood.
Islamic law.
Islamic law is suitable for all centuries. It has been interpreted by Islamic scholars, and they have interpreted with respect to their situation or lifetime. But even now, the current situation hasn't changed much at the time of the scholars.
It is an inflexible approach to Sharia law that is forcing many Muslims to go back to the Quran. There they find, for example, a verse used to sanction polygamy comes with an important condition.
The question that we raise is, how come part of the verse that says marry up to 4 is universally known, is codified into, is practiced in much of the Muslim world, and the other part of the verse is, if you fear you cannot do justice, marry only one, is for God pushed aside, and most Muslims do not know part of the verse.
It says specifically, you may marry 4, however, you will never be fair. And so if you cannot be fair and you fear the wrath of God, of Allah, so therefore you may just marry one husband. He's married with children. I hope that, you know, I have another go at, you see? No. Because I'm still young, you know.
Probably the difficulty she faced over this long period of time was a punishment from God for sins she may have committed in the past. We believe that this is God's test for her to strengthen her faith, be among the best women in Islam. A true Muslim woman.
6 months after he met Ida, the court had yet. Perhaps nowhere else in the world is Sharia law causing as much controversy as it is in northern Nigeria. This is Kano, once a trading center of Trans-Saharan crossroad. It is now a city of 3 million people. Today, one of the first things a visitor notices here is all the minivans with pictures of cultural heroes in their windows. Among them, Indian film stars and Osama bin Laden. Islam came to northern Nigeria 700 years ago. Penal codes were enforced until 1960. Punishments such as amputations and were outlawed. Then, following the defeat of Nigeria's military dictatorship in 1999, the resurgent Islamic movement backed the re-implementation of Sharia criminal laws across 12 states in the country, predominantly Muslim north. Dr. Ahmad is president of the Supreme Council that oversees the implementation of Sharia law here. He but refused to be seen in public with a Western film crew.
Islam is our culture. We have other culture. Anything that is un-Islamic, you find is not accepted. Secularism is a Christian concept. We are not Christians. We are Muslims. And in Islam, there is no separation between what is Caesar's and what is God's. It is only Caesar.
Sharia law is Islam. It is the penal and the civil component of the life of a Muslim.
Local attorney Muzamil Hunga says corruption and crime had levels, that implementation of a Sharia penal code with its harsh punishments was an urgent necessity.
Armed robbery was all increasing in this country. The disparity between the rich and the poor is there. The prisons are set up. So when there was a hint that any part of the country, any state, can choose a legal system different from the English law legal system and, you know, establish it and practice it, people were like, you know, they have been released from a chain. The response is overwhelming. By
8 o'clock in the morning on that day, not only the ground, the 9 major roads leading to the ground were choked up.
Hung and other local Muslim leaders arrived in central Kano to announce the implementation of the new penal code. They were met by a crowd of tens of thousands, Muslims hoping to end crime and corruption.
The most common thoughts probably was that we are free now. I believe the drama for the implementation of Sharia is like an open show of defiance against the government, which is perceived by the Muslims the sole agent of corruption in this country.
Much of events to apply Sharia law, what we see in Nigeria, for instance, or even Pakistan, is a desire, much of people, to see the general principles of justice followed. It is a desire by the people to see their system of laws be more equitable, call for action.
The Islamization of northern Nigeria has increased tensions between Muslim majority and Christian minority communities that were already divided along tribal lines. Muslims are not subject to Sharia law, but there have been deadly riots where Christian restaurants and bars serving alcohol have been destroyed. In October of 2001, religious clashes triggered when Muslims protesting the U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan went rampaging with Christian brotherhood.
They went into the marketplace. They burned some of the shops of non-Muslims, and the non-Muslims retaliated, burned some of the shops of Muslims, and the whole thing got out of control. I would say 200 people died. It was sad. This country, from the beginning, was designed to accommodate people of different beliefs. So we condemn that, and we urge people to understand as human beings, they have to live with other people.
Educate our children.
Although no reliable statistics are compiled, Ahmad claims that Sharia is working because the crime rate here plummeted.
You see, the purpose of Islam is to scare you from committing the crime, to punish you. The purpose is to make the punishment so scary that nobody goes near it.
The hope is that Islam will create a new generation of God-fearing Muslims.
Islam against addiction. Addiction is huge. Islam is also homosexuality. Homosexuality is crime under Islam and is punishable by death. Sexual intercourse outside marriage is forbidden. It is punished by either 100 strokes of the cane in the case of unmarried people, or by death in the case of married people.
Safiya Hussein's sentence was to be buried in sand and then stoned to death.
One adultery case has made international news. Under Islamic law, stringent rules of evidence require either a confession by the accused or the existence of 4 eyewitnesses. In this case, evidence that is not common to Sharia courts was applied.
This is a case of a woman who have indulged in adultery. No proof of her indulging in the act at the time they were doing it. The proof that worked against her was a baby born out of wedlock. A man, by nature, cannot conceive, not have a baby. So it is sad. And here, if there is any double standard, not from the point of view, probably would accuse God of showing double standards. I think it's safer not to do that.
Sharia criminal law is practiced in only a handful of Muslim countries, including Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. Here, interpretations of Sharia have shocked many people, including many Muslims around the world. As political pressures mounted in the Husseini case from within and without Nigeria, the courts backed off. Safiya Husseini was pardoned because it was determined her adultery occurred before the reintroduction of the Sharia criminal code. Still, Attorney Hunk proudly drove us through Kanu and pointed out that now 36 Sharia courts operating here.
There are, in all, 36 Sharia courts created after the re-implementation of Sharia in countries. 2 of them are here, 1 here, and then another one.
We asked a judge some recent cases from his books.
Based on your constitutional statement made by you, Omar Mohammed, saying that you have taken alcohol drink.
This was a case of a man who confessed to drinking a beer.
You are here, I sentenced you to the punishment 80 lashes.
Next, we visited another court where a murder case was being tried. The victim's brother is accusing this man, Sanusi, of murder.
Sanusi brought this honorable court alleged to have committed offense of intentional homicide. He was in the house of Bashir Jibrin. They did it mainly to kill him. Jack him up, knock him on the ground, used broken blocks on his head, took a eye with screwdriver. It's intentional killing. The reason he gave is that he was Bashir have an affair with his father's. If you go through the Holy Quran, God Almighty says, whoever kills should be killed. If you chop away somebody's hand should be chopped away. Eye for eye, nose for nose, ear for ear. If you kill, you will be killed.
No judgment has yet been reached, but if convicted, life may still be spared. Under Sharia law here, the victim's family can mercifully decide to waive the penalty and accept a monetary settlement instead. He returned to Attorney Hunga's house for dinner that night. While his family broke a week fast, he explained why he believes that Westerners find Sharia law troubling.
We look at these things from different mirrors. In the West, I think the emphasis is on human freedom. An individual is entitled to freedom to do what he likes, even if what he likes falls short of the moral scale. The overall emphasis in Islamic law is on communal harmony. The community to live without one rough element, destroying life for them, just as he wants to live happily. We have, on our own volition, accepted that the provisions of Islam are cogent enough to govern human life. What is more, the security. Once Sharia is there, people go to bed without even locking the front door. If you fear any thief coming in, the only thing you fear now is just goats or chickens to disturb your sleep. The West wanted to always show that this notion of barbarism with Islamic law is actually true. With the event of September 11th, the West is frantic, trying to worlds, the free, civilized, forward-looking Western world, and the civilized Islamic world. I believe the reaction in the West increases the reaction of Muslims in this part of the country. People have to be allowed to believe in what they want to believe.
The rejection of Western penal codes and the imposition of Sharia may be unsettling to some. A very different concern is the popularity here of a man known widely as an international terrorist.
You asked why you see Bin Laden speak all over the place. It is so. I say he's extremely popular with the people. And these are the ordinary people, the lorry drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers. Follow a series of buses in Kano. You will see his pictures because they regard him as a hero. I have not talked to anyone of them. I understand their feelings. Here is one man who is given at the U.S. around the one country that is killing all over the world. The one country that is regarded by these people in their understanding as the worst enemy of Muslims and Islam. The one country that is giving Israel 3 billion arms, aeroplanes, kill Muslims, defenseless Muslims in refugee camps. There is one man who is giving them arm for their money. So there is
In 1998, bin Laden struck here at the U.S. in Kenya, East Africa. Since the 1980s, reports of attacks on Western targets across the world have left people convinced that all Muslims are anti-Western.
I don't think the average Muslim is against the average Westerner. I think a lot of Muslims are against Western politics, governments, because of they perceive that Western governments do and influence their countries. True and simple.
Among the first places where Islam was used to legitimize a violent response to Western influence was here in Egypt. In the 1960s, many young educated Muslims were increasingly dissatisfied with the failure of socialism under Gamal Abdel Nasser and capitalism under Anwar Sadat to produce social and economic gains. Islamic scholars of Al-Azhar University had lost credibility to state control. Calls for justice and reform came from a growing number of independent mosques. Some sheikhs were against the government and its Western allies. They called for an Islamic state that returned the ethical principles of the Sharia. Among them was the so-called blind sheikh, Omar Abdul Rahman. He preached jihad.
Jihad has the interpretation. Jihad means the ability to control yourself. And this, according to the Prophet, the highest degree or highest level of jihad. But also means you fight the enemy.
Sharia condemns the killing of the young, the elderly, and the innocent, but it does permit Muslims to defend the Muslim community if it comes under attack.
Some of those people who are called terrorists consider that they are fighting against those who fight against them. I don't stress too far, but we do have a problem of interpretation. A text can be interpreted differently by different people. And those interpretations become legitimate to those who interpret text in that manner. We have several interpretations. Who's to say who's right?
To the Egyptian militants' interpretation of jihad, anyone who prevented them from implementing their vision of Islam became a legitimate target.
Those who interpret jihad as, a tool to change the political system, believe, there is no other way to change the political system but through violence.
President Sadat clamped down.
The demonstrations against President Assad have been building up for some time. This weekend, the president's formidable security force moved in to detain religious leaders. Opposition newspapers were closed down and journalists and politicians detained in a sweeping operation that was the indication of the seriousness of the opposition. The president, though, is unrepentant. It is a bird.
A member of the Islamic opposition at the time was Muntasir el-Zayat.
Sadat became annoyed with the Islamists. He thought they'd gone beyond what was permitted. Sadat tried to get rid of the Islamic Society, but they were quicker in getting rid of him. Some of its members killed him on the reviewing stand on October 6, 1981.
Among 300 people put on trial after Sadat's assassination, Sheikh Rahman, and a medical doctor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who would become bin Laden's second in command.
We are Muslims who believed in their religion. We tried our best to establish the Islamic State and Islamic
repression of Muslim activists that followed Sadat's killing precipitated 2 decades of violence in Egypt. The attacks culminated in November 1990, when militants massacred 50 tourists at the ancient site of Luxor.
We say that tourists are infidels and, you know, they don't believe in Islam, whatever, so they are legitimate targets. But I think we're more motivated by the fact that that if they hit the regime, the economic forces of the regime, then they achieve part of their goal.
Following year, the militants took jihad even further. In 1998, Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri called on all Muslims to take up arms against the United States, which they accused of attacking the Ummah, the worldwide Muslim community.
If a part of that Ummah is attacked, then the Ummah is responsible for the defense of that area. Now, if the Palestinians are attacked, if the Iranians are attacked, if the Iraqis are attacked, indeed, if Muslims in this country are attacked, and Muslims elsewhere should come to the aid of those Muslims. So, as long as Muslims continue to be attacked, and they have been attacked throughout for centuries, etc., the fight continues.
By 2001, Osama bin Laden was planning an attack on America. It would create greater suspicion than perhaps any event in history. In America, the night of September 11th brought crowds onto the streets. Across the country, Muslims were brutally and physically abused. Some mosques were vandalized. In Bridgeview, Illinois, protesters were moving towards the local mosque when police moved in and blocked their path. The police still patrol outside the Bridgeview Mosque from schools next door. For American Muslims, numbering 5 to 7 million, issues are starkly different than are in majority Muslim countries. Here, it's about getting along with other American minority.
Let's move on, guys. Let's go.
Safa Zarzour came to the United States from Syria 16 years ago as a student. He became a teacher, and today he is principal of the Muslim Universal School next door to the Bridgeview Mosque. After the terrorist attacks, he received a...
And it's basically about 5-6 sentences of profanities and insults and threatening remarks. I don't know who sent it. It's someone who knows that I'm the principal of this school, because they said, I'm going to blow up your school.
The letter, laced with obscenities, was turned over to the FBI.
We are human, so you go through all kinds of emotions. I would say the first week I was afraid. Definitely I was afraid because, I mean, even, you know, I found myself taking my children, my wife, and going up to the second floor for fear of somebody doing something through the window of the first floor. But at no time did I feel like that's going to alter anything. I mean, I felt like that's part of life. It's being different in America, yes.
Even before September, there were tensions. One incident happened in the town next door to Bridgeview, Palos Heights, Illinois.
The Mosque Foundation community grew so quickly that people were looking for other venues and other places. Put a mosque, to put a center.
Dr. Amina McLeod is a Muslim and an expert in Islamic studies. She's built her career studying American Muslim community. She watched the Palos Heights controversy start 2 years ago. The Muslims found a place for the new mosque, an empty church.
This church of Christ Community Church is the place that had been up for sale, and Muslims moved to buy it, and all hell broke. all of a sudden the township wanted to keep it for itself. As it turned out, when people all came out, the real issue was that they did not want Muslims to buy this property. One woman here in Palos Heights, her first response was, oh, so they're going to put that tower on top of the church and singing that song every time there's prayer. You know, that is her image.
At public hearings, some residents who objected to the mosque proposed a recreation center in place.
The foundation in Virtue has over 60,000 members. 60,000 members. How are you going to put the traffic?
Other members of the community spoke up against what they called open racism.
I start to think of the conversations going on in Palos Heights homes about the issues of Muslims coming to our community. These are the conversations that impart our values to our children. I have heard concerns that our community will meet on Sunday. Good, less congestion on Sunday. There was a concern that they would school children there. Well, that's a nasty habit. I've heard concern that the Muslim people are too conservative or their treatment is restricted. Are these sins worse than bigotry?
You have ministers, not all of them, but several key figures saying, wait a minute, you know, these are our neighbors. They have the right to property. You had other people on the city's council, absolutely not. These people are practicing demonic religion, just ages-old nonsense about Islam.
The Muslims accepted a monetary settlement and agreed not to buy the church. Still, they went to charging discrimination.
It has gone now all the way to a federal judge saying, I want you to enter into religious dialogue. And after you do this for a time, let us see what changes. And I think that judge, whoever he or she is, just ought to get a Nobel Prize. And even though they ordered it, people in the community had to think enough of their community to take the challenge. And they have.
McLeod has been advising the community in Palos Heights and observing the interfaith dialogue, which continues while the case awaits trial.
How have you managed to make this different faith work? What is it?
There was a substantial number of Christians here who felt the same way as Muslims, that we have the right to practice faith.
But it was this instant. How long have you lived here?
Actually, by now, 28 years.
Did you know these people before?
Know those people before, no.
It's not that it was perfect, because we did have struggles. There was controversy amongst the group, but we kept coming back to why are we here? What is the reason?
The Christians found they were the ones with the most. The Muslims became teachers about Islam and how to understand different similarities between their faiths.
One issue that we have to, that we all worship this one and the same God. You know, we had trouble as Muslims with it. If there is only one God, how come we have that? You know, and you know, we're not going to get into the details.
Don't get us started.
You know, but we, you know, we all believe in God. We all believe in the life after death. We all believe in the angels. We all believe in the day of judgment. Now, you know, there's more emphasis in Christianity upon Christ as the incarnation, and in our Islam, the Quran, equivalent to Christ. The Quran to us is the actual word of God.
I wish I could be more generous in what I say, but I do stop short of saying that we all worship the same God, because I'm not sure what it means to say that we all worship the same God, but we don't all believe in crucifixion. And I can say that I saw God in my Muslim friends, but I can't quite say that we worship the same God. I can't.
I want to...
It'd be easier if I could have.
The Quran teaches God is the God of Adam, the God of Noah, the God of Abraham, the God of Moses, the God of Jesus, is the very same God. And the Quran emphasizes that all these prophets were Muslims, meaning submitted their will to the will of the only true God. My presentation in church, sometimes I ask the audience of the church to recite the Lord's Prayer. Then, they are very proud to recite for me what Jesus instructed them to teach. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, be done on earth as it is in heaven. After they are done, I say Islam in a cap. As simple as that, because the emphasis here, whom we call Allah, you call the Father. The only difference between you as a Christian and us as Muslims, that we put all our emphasis on that Father.
This dialogue continues. They meet once a month. In America, the Muslim population includes immigrants and those born here, a large number of whom are African Americans. Groups don't always get along. We witnessed this during a discussion at McLeod's house.
Black folk had to be concerned with it because...
McLeod was joined by her family and two friends. One of Pakistani descent who lost his job at a Muslim relief organization when the federal government froze its assets after September 11th.
My parents came here, they worked, in Canada, they earned an honest living. All of a sudden today I'm told that, without reason that, you work for a so-called organization and you can't do this anymore. And I can't come to terms with it.
The federal government froze the assets of his Global Relief Foundation, alleging it had secret entities they were helping to finance terrorist activities. The foundation denies the charge. McLeod feels the civil rights of innocent immigrants are being violated and that all American Muslims should be concerned. McLeod's own daughter sees it differently.
As far as I'm concerned, Arabs, they came over here, they didn't know bonding or care or want to have any type of even Muslim relationship with African Americans. I don't think African Americans who've always had problems with civil rights should be sticking their neck out for people asking for trouble and for a group of people who have done nothing. Period.
My major area is Quran.
McLeod herself converted to Islam in 1966. She is now an associate professor of Islamic studies at Chicago's DePaul University.
Because the African American Muslim community is the largest group of Muslims in the country,
she chose her field. She saw a special need for accurate knowledge about the African American Muslim community.
It occurred to me in graduate school that everybody thought all African American Muslims belonged to the Nation of Islam, which I thought was probably the funniest thing I ever heard, because I knew no members of the Nation of Islam, but I knew members of African American Muslims. So
in fact, the majority of African American Muslims belong not to the Nation of Islam, but to the Muslim American Society, led by Imam Uddin Mohammed. The total number of African American Muslims in all groups is estimated between 1.5 and 5 million.
As historians and other researchers uncover a very rich Muslim past and slavery, they're looking at in 2002, Christianity is still about race. It's still the blonde-haired white with blue eyes. They're saying, no, I'm not worshiping white men. For some others who were nothing, you know, I mean, not inside of a structured religious community, it is I want to be inside of a structured religious community. African-American conversion, a lot like Latino-American conversion, is sometimes from dissatisfaction, sometimes from searching.
I was like searching for a better life.
A resident of Los Angeles was raised a Christian. In November of 2001, she became one of an estimated 20,000 Americans a year who are converting to Islam.
I was having a lot of problems, and I wasn't living right. I was running around, clubbing night, drinking, smoking weed.
Dia went to a wedding at the King Fahd Mosque in Culver City. She'd never even been inside a mosque before.
It was beautiful when I walked in. I don't know who it was that day, but he was saying the call to prayer. It made me feel really good. It was like, it made me stop. And I kept saying, what is that called? What's he saying? You know, it would sound really beautiful when he was saying. The first time that I had ever seen prayer being done in Mass Church. Okay, we're coming like about 12:30.
So a month or so later, Dia made the decision to become a Muslim. Her children already attended a Muslim daycare center in East L.A. run by her godaunt, Khadija.
And when I drove over here to bring kids, I walked in the door. I saw, you know, her and everyone in their covered and all the little kids in their covers. And just looked at her and said, I want to take Shahada. And then she was like, what?
Shahada is the declaration of faith. That was telling her
that I
want to become a Muslim.
And I said, okay, give me my hijab, give me the old dress and everything. And everyone was like, oh my, you know, like you're going to cover your head up? They didn't expect me to, like, man, blown like that.
We had charity, we had into the month of Ramadan, we had God.
Since she's converted, Dia's been staying at her god's house.
We had Shahada, so what's missing?
At Aunt Khadija's, she lives in a Muslim world. But past the front door, it's a heavily Christian neighborhood.
Like you see, I'm surrounded by Jesus is everywhere. It's on every corner.
Dia is still dealing with the reaction to her conversion from friends and colleagues who knew her before.
We're on our way to the Silver Slipper Beauty Salon. I used to work there for many years. They were really shocked when they first found out that I converted. And asked me, well, how can you do... Muslims don't date, and they think that the women are deprived. Hello? Okay. I'm fine, how are you? Were you shocked when you see me? Okay, everybody was shocked, yeah.
Yeah, it was shocked.
Do you think I'm more calm?
I have to be around you a little longer. Like, we have to go out and eat. You know, but so far, you're a little calmer, yeah. Because usually, even when you come here, you're like,
I was like asleep by 9.
Oh, that's
okay,
that's totally not you.
Yeah, that's not me at all.
I'm still, like I say, look, we're going to see what's going on. But hopefully, if it's going to just help with that and help focus and calm, I'm all for it.
You know, everybody's just like... I feel not apart from the community. I feel different. I feel different. You know, to be a good Muslim is like to be a good Christian or to be a good Jew.
As an African American, he made the choice to become a Muslim. For immigrants, the choice is how to negotiate their traditions within a secular American culture.
Let's move, you girls. Girls, let's go.
At the Universal School, Bridge, Illinois, Sarzour sees living in two cultures as both challenge and opportunity.
Our vision and our dream is that something that's called the African Muslim identity forming with those kids, just like any other religious or ethnic group.
There are now over 400 Muslim days across America.
Very quickly I realized how much children who have been born and raised in America, how much they face, because many times their parents are immigrants and they don't know a lot of what goes on in the society. I talked to your mom yesterday. And those kids kind of feel like they want to make their mom and dad happy, but also there's the society that they are faced with and they have to live in. And it's very hard to kind of negotiate those things. I feel like I have balanced the two, and I can transfer that somehow.
You're going to write 2 journal entries. First entry is going to be how your life was before history.
We teach them what Islam stands for as a religion, the way, you know, the average Muslim in the world practices. And I show them within the American society those beautiful things that are at the heart of Islam, and show them how there is no contradiction in essence. I see more Islamic values in this country than I see in the so-called Islamic countries. You know, the heart of it is justice and fairness and the rule of law and equality before the law and those things.
The school also makes a point of teaching the students about other religions.
I believe that Abraham is the father of all 3 religions, of the father of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so we feel that our kids, we have a responsibility to make them familiar with those 2 religions in particular.
Since September 11th, Sarzour has also been involved in dialogue with Muslims outside the school.
Up until maybe a few months ago, my feeling is that although there is the occasional person out there, the occasional racist, in general, what we are experiencing is just what everybody else experienced when they are a new community, put themselves together, trying to introduce themselves to the larger American society, to all other groups. Now, about September 11, and I feel like there's an added burden. I almost feel like we as Muslims may have the luxury that the Irish Catholics had, or the Jews had, or anybody else had, that those people had the luxury to develop. Everybody look at them and say, yes, you are an American. Yeah, you are a Jew, but you are an American. Yes, you are a Catholic, but you are an American.
I mean, the only faith that I've seen, if somebody commits a crime and he's Muslim, it's Islam. It's spread on the front. You look. Muslim commits a crime. You know, if Tom or John or something, it's not, they're not going to say, oh, a Catholic man commits crime or a Jewish man. It's the. I mean, you can complain about it or you can change it.
To me, that is precisely what I worry about, is we become victims.
The only thing that I know how to be is an American. That's the only thing that I know how to be, is an American Muslim. When somebody questions my my country, it's frustrating, but I believe communication is the key.
I think people in this community have at some point decided that we are American Muslims, and that somehow we are going within those 2 grounds and not limit ourselves to one or the other, and definitely not split our personality into 2 separate ones. Allah Akbar. In fact, I look at Muslims in the United States as being in a very unique position to be able to use a model for how Islam can be led and how it can be practiced vis-a-vis other religions and other peoples. Allahu Akbar.
For some Muslims, building that new American identity has meant making personal decisions they'd never even considered before.
Having grown up in Saudi Arabia, being a Muslim wasn't really an option. It wasn't really anything you thought about. You were required to live a Muslim life.
Yasmin Saeed moved to America with her parents 12 years ago. Now she's a New York marketing professional who has found her own way to Muslim.
It wasn't until I came to the United States that my spiritual identity came to question for the very first time, because I actually had the option of believing and not believing. I had the option of choosing to practice or not practice. It wasn't until about the last year that I have truly become very secure and comfortable with my connection to Islam.
And connection took a new turn after September 11th.
I'm calling from Muslims Against Terrorism.
From what?
It's an organization called Muslims Against Terrorism. No, it just right.
Muslims Against Terrorism came about the day after September 11th. We were completely in shock, paralyzed by the tragedy. And a group of us, Muslim professionals from varying backgrounds, basically emailed and called each other and said, you know, this is enough. We need to stop allowing extremists dictate the public face of Islam. We, most importantly, just offer this kind of dialectic just because we are doing a PR. We backed ourselves up with ideology, because that is the same language extremists are using. One example is jihad that they claim that they're doing is completely grounded. It was just completely un-Islamic.
Yasmin volunteers 8 to 10 hours a week. Presentations at churches, synagogues, groups. On this, she was speaking to New York City public school students.
Let's start getting some conversation going.
So, like, brainstorm the stereotypes that we feel that are out there against Muslims and Arabs.
The students had listed what they believed to be common prejudices against Muslims.
Go to the mosque, pray. Next.
Terrorists. Barrios.
Own stores, own smoke shops. Women wear scarves. Women are uneducated, been in jail, don't eat pork, they're black, wear nose rings, must be married before having sex, a lot of children.
This is very good, actually. I would have to say that you probably pretty much summed it up. I mean, summed up most of general misconceptions and biases people have of Arabs and Muslims. People who are not very well informed Islam assume that Islam is an Arabic religion. Assume that all Muslims are Arabs and all Arabs are Muslims. Here's a fact. Only 13% of the entire Muslim population in the world are actually Arabs. So it's a small percentage, okay?
What I feel my contribution is to be able to at least bridge the gap, the intolerance that exists, the ignorance of knowledge about Islam, and just kind of put a new face to Islam.
This veil is not representation of Islam. It is not. It is not required by Islam. It is not something that women have to wear.
In America, Yasmin has chosen not to cover her hair except when she goes to mosque or other religious activities. Sometimes other Muslims object.
By virtue of the fact that I don't wear hijab, I'm automatically questioned every day, all the time. I may know 100 times more about Islamic faith than another Muslim woman who chooses to wear hijab, but some parts of the Muslim community will probably take her more seriously over me because they associate Islamism with how much you cover.
The more common way.
Yasmin learned much of what she knows about Islam from her father. He's a surgeon, now retired and divorced from Yasmin's mother. He lives in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. On the weekend home, the conversation turned to issues affecting abroad. There had been a recent attack by Muslim extremists on a church in Pakistan. Father and daughter turned to a passage in the Quran discussing proper attitudes toward people of other faiths.
So in other words, it puts the people, the Christians, we are Christians, priests and monks, treat them with their nearest with affection.
Therefore, the fight between Muslims and non-Muslims, they said, if you see any priests or monks, any religion, don't touch them at all.
Yeah, and then what happens in Pakistan, they go into a church and then they blow people up.
As I told you, Yasmin, this has nothing to do with Islam. This is politic. Because to kill a person, any person, is big sin. Any person, religious or non-religious.
Yeah, but Dad, not everything. You know what I think is the biggest problem in the Muslim community? We're in a constant denial. We always say, oh, you know, this is not religion, this is not politics. We're such conspiracy theorists that we don't accept the fact that there are Muslims out there who sincerely do this because they believe in it. I mean, can't we accept that fact?
No, that's you are. But this is not only Muslim and non-Muslim. This is of the world. I'm very sorry. What to do?
Yeah, well, but Missy, that's not good enough for me. What to do is the condition that helps. You know, you say, oh, well, you know, what can we do?
No.
You know, it was very hard to grapple with saying, you know what, we need to take responsibility. We need to be able to face the truth. Because we can't change our future if we can't face the truth.
But still, they are a human being. They can make it too.
In America, Muslims like Yasmin and her father are relatively free to debate their faith and politics, but largely removed from the rest of the Muslim world from which they emigrated. It is in Muslim countries and Islamic states like Iran the decisive battles are being fought. Here, traditionalists and reformers, conservatives and militants are engaged in a daily struggle over who among them will define the future face of Islam. The last 20 years have seen Islamic states established in Sudan and Afghanistan as well as in Iran. But it is here the process of Islamization has had longest to mature. Professor of Political Science, Hadi Samati, is an advisor to Iran's reformist president, Mohammed Haq. Once, Samati was a revolutionary student who supported scholars' Islamization of Iran. He fondly remembers the idealism of his youth.
We wanted to build a society where loyalty, community, and sense of belonging, and of course moral restraint and social behavior would be strong. But at the same time, the banking system, economic systems, everything would be affected by it. We didn't know the details of it for sure, but we knew that we had to create this society of moral human being and architect it in a way that would be the model and a type of golden age.
Today, Samati hasn't lost vision for a society built on Islamic principles, but he is thinking how it can be achieved.
The reform movement, but stripping out some of these excesses and interpretations and misperceptions of Islam, and really going back to the core, which was essentially what we all strive for, that is building a moral society in which people can flourish and can fulfill their potentials. But it's not going to happen in here. It's a long educational process, and that long educational process needs actually freedom of thought.
In 1997, the promise of greater social and political freedom led to the landslide election victory of Iran's President Mohammed Hadi. His reformist agenda had special appeal for Iran's increasingly young population and to women. Nazanin Sharokny.
President Khatami was the only candidate who paid special attention to empowerment of women, and he insisted that we must use women's power, we must use them in our society because they are half of our population, and we have to use their energy. I can tell you somehow what maybe women want is to have more places in the public sphere, to see more positive attitudes toward them, because the society can't remain religious, but at the same time it can give women more play and more opportunity choices and hopefully more rights.
Nazanin is a sociologist who writes for a magazine in Tehran called Not, or Woman.
We are a magazine dedicated to women's issues, and Zanon is well known for its reformist and at the same time feminist, at the same time religious view about women.
In Iran, working in the takes courage. In 2001, some 15 were imprisoned for challenging state policies. Nan's editor, Shalkat, founded her magazine in 1992. It often covers sensitive issues like AIDS, domestic violence, and women's rights.
Some say it was harmful for families because women started to fight with their husbands after knowing what rights they have. But I guess that's like patriarchal, what Zanon been doing. Because, well, if there are rights for women, they have to be aware of it. Because well, women are human as men are, so they have to have same rights, equal rights. And why not push for it?
The push for reform in Iran is often undermined by hardline scholars who still advocate obedience over individual choice. Hadi Samati is increasingly realistic about what political Islam can achieve.
I think we put Islam in a position where we presume that it could resolve, and it should resolve, every fundamental little detail of life. You don't have to necessarily solve every question in your life by Islam. Islam gives you a direction, gives you a light, so to speak. The sense of belonging.
The feelings of young Iranians spilled onto Tehran's streets in October of 2001. Several soccer matches turned into street protests against the regime. By the time we filmed a month later, the security forces had clamped down, but the demonstrations had illustrated popular frustration with the rate of change. At Zanon, caught journalists talking about the match and about how much women have yet to achieve. While women fans could attend the match, Iranian women had heard from the stadium.
علت اینکه جلوگیری که فکر میکنن که چون موقع تماشای فوتبال شلوغ میکنن و هر تیپی ممکنه وجود داشته، الفاظ خوبی به کار نبرن، سر و صدا بکنن، از زنها باید یه مراقبت ویژه‌ای بشه و اینها، و این معنیش اینه که خودشون نمیتونن از خودشون مراقبت کنن. به این دلیل
یعنی همیشه به خاطر خشونت مردا یا به خاطر مثلا دارایی که دارن، یه به نظر من یه محدودیت این جریان اعمال میشه.
At Zanon, their struggle for a more inclusive interpretation of Islam continues. But since 2000, 30 reform publications have been down. In 2001, Sharkat was arrested and fined for suggesting that women should not be forced to cover by law. In April of 2002, a newspaper editor in the north of Iran was sentenced to 7 months jail and 74 lashes. Government false reporting.
Well service.
Washington to witness the destruction caused when a hijacked plane crashed into the building. Earlier, he described the attacks on New York and Washington as an act of war against the States.
Attacks on America have accelerated the process of self-examination by Muslims everywhere. On September 11th, we were filming in Malaysia.
Islam teaches justice, teaches peace, and, you know, it doesn't advocate acts of terrorism, acts of violence, acts of discrimination and of women. And yet, there are Muslims who use the religion to commit such acts. This doesn't help the cause of other Muslims trying to put forward an Islam that is democratic, that's pluralistic, that believes in justice, in equality, in freedom.
Wherever we went in the Muslim world, we met people like Zaina, frustrated by intolerance and conservatism.
I absolutely see no contradiction in being a modern person, an independent woman, in demanding for my human rights, my to choose life and to reach my full potential, and being a good person as well.
Recently, Zaina Anwar was appointed to the government's Human Rights Commission. Zaina would like to see what she and other lecturers regard as a more flexible, more universal expression of Islam.
Social and cultural. The first approach to Islam would not be wedded to an interpretation of Islamic law and say, well, you know, you prove your Islamic credentials by chopping off the hands or stoning adulterer and adulterers and all the rest of it, because that is not what defines Islam. The approach would regard women as equal. The more universal approach to Islam would emphasize values, universal values which others also identify with.
I'm just saying that don't wake up and shout and scream. Not, you know, educating ourselves about Islam and start having the courage to speak and to challenge and to offer a different view. We're heading into an Islamic state, you know, our rights and our fundamental liberties, you know, which is sold away more and more.
Is concerned about the continued spread of conservative Islam. On this day, she was joined by political scientist Farish Noor.
Concepts like Islamic State only have appeared in the context of Muslim.
He rejects the idea that the Islamic State is a Muslim tradition. It is a recent phenomenon.
Really, when you look at the history of Islam, Islamic civilization, you see the concept of an Islamic State beginning to take off only from the early 19th century onwards. Prior to the 19th century, the concept of this state, the very term itself, does not exist. An Islamic State appears at a time when the world is under crisis, institutional crisis, political and economic. So there is a reactive nature to this sort of politics from the beginning. Now, when I say it's a modern concept...
The popular appeal of political Islam, he suggests, must be seen in terms of social and economic dispute.
In the case of practically every Muslim country in the world today, there is a secular alternative to the dominant power, simply because the secular alternative in the 60s was the left, and the left was during the Cold War. This leaves political Islam as the only alternative for many Muslims in the world today. This is therefore the problem that those who work in human rights are facing, because on the one hand, the sense of frustration and anger from people who want an alternative. But on the other hand, for us, of course, our concerns are that the alternative, in many cases, can be, in fact, much worse than the status quo itself.
In February 2002, a group of Islamic scholars accused both Zaina Anwar and Farish Noor of insulting and abusing Islam. Even in Malaysia, the charge carries a sentence of up to 3 years in jail.
We as a society want to run our lives according to the teachings of Islam. Is that the traditionalists feel that only those trained traditionally in religion have a right to talk about religion. We are saying that if you want to use religion to govern our public lives, then we as citizens of a democratic country have a right to participate in that decision.
The struggle by Muslims, the role of Islam in their societies, is as old as the faith itself. It's a battle over interpretations. Some Muslims believe Islam promotes democracy and advocates human rights. Others invoke Islam to sanction their own authority. It's a struggle that matters. Today, the world is a smaller place. Ideas travel more among people and across borders. Battles once distant have consequence everywhere. In November 2002, the pro-Islam party won a landslide victory in national elections. Leading reformer Abdullah Gül became prime minister. Swear to defend Turkey's secular state, he remains insistent that a Muslim identity can be compatible with a modern world. Gül has already declared his intention to lift the ban on women wearing in government offices and universities.
There's more to explore on our website from Muslims, including expanded profiles with video of Muslim report, a primer on the basic tenets of the Islamic faith, frequently asked questions of Islam, the extended interviews with Muslim historians and scholars, and check out the Teacher's Guide, or find out if this program is re-airing on our local PBS station. Then join the discussion at pbsonline.org, or write an email frontline@pbs.org, or write to this address.
The events of September, a double tragedy.